Welcome to Less Than 12 Parsecs, the fastest Star Wars podcast in the galaxy. Now here's your host, Tim McMahon.
Jedi strength flows from the Force, but beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they.
Hey guys, it's Tim. Nope, not that Tim. Got a different Tim here this episode. I'm Tim from the Nerd Room podcast, and given Tim McMahon's absence, the Star Wars Commonwealth is taking over his feed for the next week. So we're going to be running shows here on Less Than 12 Parsecs. And I wanted to come and join this and do this with Tim because I wanted to hear from you guys, actually. I have witnessed a lot of the toxicity in fandom, and I'm not here to directly address any of that, but I wanted to share what I personally love about Star Wars and why I stay in this fandom and what got me into this fandom. And I'd love to hear from you guys as well as to what you enjoy about Star Wars. It's very easy to nitpick. It's very easy to fall into this trap that's become this commonplace negativity within fandom. And I find myself wanting at times to really take a step back because I feel like this isn't the fandom that I thought it was. But then I took a moment and I really thought about what fandom is to me. And a lot of it comes down to podcasting, to sharing fandom with people that love it, with people that love the stories that are being told, and with people that are able to put a positive and bright spin on what Star Wars is today. I'm not one to sit here and consume all this negativity. I don't think any fandom can survive that. But knowing how many good people are out there, people like you listening to Less Than 12 Parsecs, Tim himself, the people over at the Star Wars Commonwealth, these are the people that have made fandom important to me beyond just kind of love for Star Wars. And now, like I said, I want to talk about some of the positive things here. You know, I've loved a lot of the films recently, particularly Solo, A Star Wars Story. It is something that I absolutely had a blast with sitting in the theaters. I came out of that feeling rejuvenated again and was hoping that fandom would have felt the same way. I loved everything from the introduction of Chewbacca, Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo, the charismatic Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian, even Paul Bettany as the main antagonist. You know, he didn't have a ton of time to develop the character, but I still really enjoyed it. We got the answers to things like the Kessel Run, to Chewbacca and Han's first meeting. Like, what is in there is absolutely brilliant. And going back even to The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens, Rogue One, these are all films in this new era of Star Wars that I have deeply connected with. And I found myself revived within fandom coming into 2015's Force Awakens. And now the one big thing, if you guys at all know me or have listened to the Nerd Room podcast, you'll know that I'm a big Star Wars collector. Now, outside of the movies themselves, outside of even fandom, collecting is what has kept me in Star Wars for years, even years when we didn't have films. I grew up in that weird generation in between the original trilogy and the debuting of the prequel, so I never had a film in my youth. Now, I did have the first film when I turned 14 with the first film in the prequel trilogy, but I never myself as a 6-year-old or 5-year-old, 7-year-old, anything like that. I never had these films. All I had was some of the lingering thoughts from my parents. But come 1995, boom, the Power of the Force 2 line hits. That's what got me into Star Wars, was collecting. And that's really what's kept me here through the years. Yes, I love fandom, I love the films, but it's what has made Star Wars really important to me. It's what led me to one of my co-hosts here on the Nerd Room podcast. It is what has allowed me to connect quite deeply with the guys over at Tumbling Saber and talk Star Wars, and is also a way, an avenue that I found myself jumping back into Star Wars pre The Force Awakens with the release of the Black Series in 2012, I believe. You know, I do everything from the Vintage Series to the Black Series to movie posters, steelbooks, everything I can get my hands on, within a certain amount of allowance from the wife. But at the end of the day, it's collecting, which really has always had my focus in Star Wars. It is what keeps bringing me back into this universe. It is what has kept me here this long, and I think going into a bit of this lull off the back end of Solo, where fandom has taken a bit of a dip, even me personally, like I mentioned a little earlier, I felt the weight of the toxicity. But when I shift my focus away from that and towards collecting and listening to other collecting podcasts and going out on the hunt, that exhilarating feeling, that plastic anxiety that we all get when we're looking for that next action figure, that is what's going to be my holdover until episode 9, until we actually get the build to the end film in this new trilogy. But really, it's got to be the collecting. It's something that we're going to see more figures dropping out here in the next year and a half. Yeah, we'll get some TV shows and all that, but at the end of the day, what it really comes down to me is collecting. That's what has my heart in Star Wars. Now, my big caveat on this is of course the guys at the Star Wars Commonwealth. This has been a piece of fandom that I had been missing my whole life, and only a couple years ago I found these guys. We joined up. We've been podcasting side by side, shoulder to shoulder, through everything from The Force Awakens into The Last Jedi, Rogue One, through a solo Star Wars story. And now there is a wide varying of opinions on these films and on fandom itself. And that's what I love about the Star Wars Commonwealth, is the fact that you can have an opinion, but the key thing here is it's opinion that is critical, if it is critical, or celebratory, if it is that, of the franchises, and all that negativity is removed. It's a place where you feel like you can express yourself without the fear of reprimand from people or keyboard warriors or whatever you want to call them. And if you're not part of this community, I would highly stress that you need to get into it, because we're having an absolute blast over here. And just to cap this off, being the fastest Star Wars podcast in the galaxy, I want to hear from you guys. Or send them the tweets to Tim, to less than 12 parsecs. I want to hear what is positive for you in Star Wars fandom. Let's shift away. Let's use this hashtag that was put out there, force out hate. How can we force out hate? By being a force of positivity. See Neil Lowry on Star Wars Twitter feeds talking about positivity. This is how we can do it. We can overwhelm that negativity with something better, with positive Star Wars podcasts like the one you're listening to right now, with positive Star Wars communities like the Star Wars Commonwealth, and by throwing things out there that you love. I love the collecting. What do you guys love? We'd love to hear from you. And I'd like to thank Tim for giving me the opportunity to come onto this podcast and talk a little bit about what I love about Star Wars fandom itself and what I love about Star Wars. Now, if you guys haven't ever heard us, we are the Nerd Room Podcast. I'm one of the hosts here. I've got my friends Sanjay and Troy that do the podcast with me. You can follow us on Twitter at the NerdRM. You can follow us, or you can grab us on email at thenerdrm@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Facebook or YouTube, and you can catch everything that ourselves and everyone at Star Wars Commonwealth do over at StarWarsCommonwealth.com. Now, until Tim gets back, I'd love to hear from you guys. Tag me on some of those tweets if you're tweeting out positivity and all that. And again, thank you to Tim for letting me contribute to this fantastic show. All right, well, until maybe the next time I show up here on Less Than 12 Parsecs for this podcast, I'm Tim, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Is the dark side stronger?
No. But the busier, more seductive.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
You will know when you are calm, at peace, passive.
You've been listening to Less Than 12 Parsecs, the fastest Star Wars podcast in the galaxy. For links and show notes, visit our website, TwelveParsecsPodcast.com. Follow Less Than 12 Parsecs on Twitter at 12parpod, on Instagram at 12parsecsPodcast, on Tumblr at 12parsecsPodcast, and find us on Facebook as well. And please let us know what you think. Email us at 12parsekspodcast@gmail.com. All Star Wars sounds, music, images, logos, designs, characters, and elements are registered trademarks and copyright of Disney, Lucasfilm Limited, and their subsidiaries and respective rights holders, and used by Less Than 12 Parsecs Podcast under fair use doctrine. All original content is copyright Tim McMahon and Less Than 12 Parsecs Podcast, released under the No Derivative Works Creative Commons license.